Well, 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 look who's here. I haven't seen you in many years. If I knew you were coming, I'd have baked a cake, baked a cake, baked a cake. If I knew you were coming, I'd have baked a cake. How'd you do, how'd you do, how'd you do? Had you dropped me a letter, I'd have hired a band, grand band in the land. Had you dropped me a letter, I'd have hired a band and spread the welcome mat for you.
Hi everybody and welcome to Baking with Tricia. I first want to thank everyone who tuned in last week to make our 2-bowl chocolate cake and who bought our kits from Smolak Farms. If this is your first time joining us, you can purchase the kits in the Smolak Farms farm stand at 315 South Bradford Street in North Andover, or you can purchase them by going to www.smolakfarms.com. So there were a couple of questions from last week, and we really appreciate those, so I just want to touch upon those for a second. First up was a question about the egg yolks in the frosting. Egg yolks, as long as they're in shell and pasteurized, they're fine to eat, so you don't have to worry about that at all. And also, it was brought to my attention that I say a lot and touch my hair. I will try very hard not to do that this week. Thank you for that. This week's recipe, which are chocolate Pop-Tarts. They are one of my favorite things. I always have Pop-Tart dough in my freezer ready to go, and that's a great thing about this recipe. You can make the dough ahead of time and keep it in your freezer for like 4 or 5 months and just pull it out. You can even keep already made Pop-Tarts in there, just don't bake them off. So in this week's kit, we are gonna have some semi-sweet chocolate chips, and this is our flour mixture with our flour, salt, and sugar. Some powdered sugar, and also our chocolate sprinkles for the top, and our sugar and salt for our chocolate filling. Alrighty. And so the things that you're gonna need from home are, you're gonna need 6 tablespoons of butter, and then also 2 sticks of butter. And I use unsalted butter. If you only have salted butter, just exclude the salt from the recipe. So in the pastry crust and in the filling, just leave out the salt if you are using salted butter. You're also going to need 2 eggs from home, and then another egg for an egg wash that we're going to use to put the Pop-Tarts together. Then we also have some heavy cream, and also from home you're going to have 3 tablespoons of milk. So that's all the ingredients that you'll be needing. And now I just want to go through some of the equipment that you should have and would be helpful to make this recipe. First, a mixer is always really helpful, but you can also use a hand mixer if you'd like. This recipe also can be used with a pastry cutter in your hands, but it'll take you forever, so do it if you want. I'm using an induction burner, but you can use the top of your stove, obviously. You need a pot and a heat-proof bowl. That's where we're going to melt our chocolate. We also have a rolling pin. I am a big fan of French rolling pins. They're the ones that are tapered at the end, but you can use any rolling pin that you have. Also a knife, and kids, don't use these at home. Have your parents cut the butter for you. A spatula, thanks. And a pastry brush. If you don't have a pastry brush, you can just use your hands or whatever. And then this is a pastry wheel, and this is to cut our pastry. If you don't have a pastry wheel, that's fine. You can use a knife, or you can use pizza cutter. I also use a bench scraper. This is what I use to transfer them from the table onto the cookie sheet, but you can also use a spatula if you'd like. And then also I always use a ruler when I'm cutting out pastry, because size does matter no matter what they tell you. And a cookie sheet, and you want it lined with parchment paper. And you don't want to use any kind of spray with this recipe. I don't really like using spray with pie dough because the oil gets into it. All right, so that's everything that we're going to need. So I'm just going to make some room and we'll get started. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is you're going to take your bag with the all-purpose flour, salt, and sugar, and we're going to put that in our mixer. And this was mixed for you ahead of time, but when you do get this recipe, if you decide you want to make it again, when you put your flour, salt, and sugar in the mixer, you do want to just give it a stir to get everything mixed up. And then once you do that, with the mixer on low, we're going to take our 2 sticks of butter, and you want to cut them into 12 equal pieces, as equal as you can. And you want to use cold butter. Anytime that you're making any kind of pastry crust or puff pastry or croissants or anything like that, you want to make sure that your ingredients are cold. The colder the ingredients, the flakier the pastry is going to be. All right. So then we're going to take our butter, and we're just going to walk our mixer. And you're going to throw the butter in there, and you just want it to, you let it go for about 1.5 to 2 minutes, and you just want the butter pieces to get to be like the size of pecans. And a lot of times what I'll do if I'm making any kind of pie crust, I will actually put my butter in the fridge or freezer for about an hour to get it really, really nice and cold. Alrighty. And so this looks about done, and what you want is, you want to make sure that it kind of holds together before you add the milk. And so now we have our milk already put aside in a dish, and so we're going to use 2 egg yolks. And the way that I separate an egg is I just pour it into my hand and get the yolk. And if you get shells in it, the best way to get them out is to just take the rest of the eggshell and dip it in the egg and pull it out. For some reason, the eggshell are attracted to the larger eggshell. Oops. Alright. And so now, probably should have used a little bit of a bigger bowl, but you just want to mix this together. And we're going to turn the mixer on and then pour in the egg. And you don't want to let this go too long. You just want it to be just barely mixed. And it's going to just look like a pile of junk, but when we get it out and start kneading it, it will come together. And one thing you always want to remember with when you're making any kind of pie dough or even with cookies, the more you mix it, the tougher the product is going to be. So if you beat the heck out of your pie dough, you're going to have a really tough pie crust. And it just doesn't taste as good. All right. So, get this out of the way. All right. So now we have our pie dough ready to be formed into a disc. So we just need some flour. You want to put a tiny, tiny bit of flour. Sometimes depending on what kind of surface I'm using. At home I have a piece of marble, and I don't flour it when I do this, but on stainless steel I like to flour it. Alrighty. So you're going to gather your pastry dough into a nice mound, and then you just take the palm of your hand and you slide it down from the middle. And again, you don't want to work it too much because it will get really tough. And if you've never had tough pastry dough, you probably don't know what I'm talking about, but you can taste the difference. It won't be as flaky, and it just won't be as good. All right. And so, once all the butter is kind of worked through, you're going to get it into a disc, and And then this pastry does need to sit in the freezer for about 4 hours, but you can keep it in the freezer for up to a month. So like I said, I always have this pastry dough in my freezer ready to go. When my niece and nephews come over, they love having homemade Pop-Tarts, so I always pull it out and make them for them. So you would just take this, and I would love some saran wrap. Okay. All right, so you have a nice disc of your dough, and this is going to be for the top and bottom crust of the Pop-Tarts. And you just want to wrap this up really tight. And it'll be ready. It'll be ready to go in the freezer. So I have one already made. And what we're going to do next is, while we're rolling out our dough, I'm going to take the chocolate chips, and you should have, your water should be at a nice simmer by now, and we're just going to pour the chocolate in the bowl. And some more flour. And so when you're rolling it out, you definitely want to really flour your surface this time. So we're going to take our pastry and we're going to cut it into 2 as equal pieces as we can. And so what I like to do, because we are making a rectangular shape, I like to just like start with a rectangle. When you're making a pie dough, you start with like a round cylinder. So, alrighty, we are just about there. All right. And so then I like to start going long ways and just roll it out. And when when you pull this out of the fridge, it sometimes can be really hard to roll. So I like to let it sit for like 10 or 15 minutes. And it just becomes a little bit easier. And so this recipe calls for the pieces to be the large rectangle to be 11.5 by 14 inches. Anything close is fine. You want to get 8 out of these, and that's the best way to get 8 out of them. But it's very rare that these come out perfect, I'll be honest. And there are some times that I get 8, there are sometimes I get 6, there are sometimes I get 10. Whatever, it's fine. And so this is where our ruler comes in handy. And obviously rulers don't go up to 14, so I just fake the last 2 inches, as many do. And so you do want to keep reflouring your surface, because this will tend to stick, especially if you're doing this at home and you have like anything but stainless steel or marble countertops. It does really tend to stick. What I like to do is I cut out the first one, and that way you have a template for the second one that you roll out. You can just lay it on top and cut it out that way. And so for this, I use a pastry roller, because what we're going to do is we're going to fill it and then put the crust on top. And if you use the pastry roller, that kind of seals it. You can also use a fork, that's totally fine. Or if you use a pizza cutter and you have that straight line, you do want to either push it down with your fingers like you would a pie, or you can also use a fork. My grandmother always did it with a fork, and I never liked how it looked, so I would always do it with my fingers. And she would always tell me that I was wrong. And I would humor her. All right, so this is just about the right size. And so now what we'll do is we'll just take our ruler, 11 is right about there, And we'll just cut it out. In pastry rollers, you can get them, even if you get them somewhere expensive, like Williams-Sonoma or something, they're like $5. So they're totally worth the money because you can use it for pies, you can use it for pastry, and it makes things a lot easier. And so today we're going to fill these with chocolate, but the great thing about these pastries is that you can fill them with anything. A lot of times what I do is I go to Smolak Farms and I buy a thing of their in-house made jam, and you can fill them with that. Just mix it with a little bit of cornstarch, and they're fantastic. You can have them with raspberry jam, strawberry. I've even used fresh apples from the farm and mixed it with some cinnamon, and they're all equally good. All right, so then I just fold this into, just fold it in fourths, and then you can take your second piece of pastry and roll it out. And again, you want to be really floured. And I would like to also mention that this adorable bracelet that I'm wearing was sent to me by 3 wonderful little kids that tuned in last week. Their names are Grayson, Caden, and Logan, and they sent this to me for me to wear on our baking show. So thank you very much. All right, and so we're just gonna repeat this. We do want to check our chocolates, and you want to make sure that this doesn't burn. And an important thing when you are, anytime you're using a double boiler, you want to make sure that the water isn't touching the bottom of the bowl, because that's what will make it burn. And you can also melt this in your microwave. I don't have a lot of luck with microwaves, melting things in them. I always tend to burn the chocolate, so I like using a double boiler better. So this one, we're going to use the other piece of pastry as our template. And this does seem like a lot of steps because you have to make the dough and then put the dough in the freezer. But like I said, if you do this stuff in advance, it makes it a lot easier, and you can just wake up on a Sunday morning and make homemade Pop-Tarts. You can melt your chocolate and make your chocolate filling ahead of time, and it can sit in the fridge. The chocolate is a little bit difficult because it does have cream in it, so you can only let it sit for about 4 days. But still, if you make it ahead of time, it's super easy to just get things made in the morning. And I even keep some already made in my freezer. And so when you eat these, if you've had Pop-Tarts, I don't know how to describe it, but the Pop-Tart like that you get from in the little aluminum bag, I mean, they're fine, but they're actually really kind of gross. But they taste more of like a cookie with the jam in the middle. But this is almost like, I don't know if they still have them, but when I was a kid, we used to have something called toaster strudel, and it was more like a puff pastry, and they were so good. And that's what this is like. And I prefer eating them warm, so they last for, once they're baked, up to about 4 days. So you can just throw them in the toaster oven or even back in the oven as long as they don't have the icing on them, and you can warm them up, and they're fantastic. Alrighty. So that should be good, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to lie this over the top and cut out our pastry. Alrighty. So now we'll just move this piece aside. And so what you want to do is you want to loosen up your bottom layer, make sure that it's make sure that it doesn't stick. And so you are going to take your ruler, I made a mess, and you're going to measure out, so you want to do 3.5 inches lengthwise and then 5 inches down, 5.5 inches down. So we'll just mark 5.5 inches right there. And then what I do is I just take my ruler and use it as a guide. And then we'll do 3.5. 3.5, and 3.5. And there's always some left at the end. One of our bakers, Peter, he always, when he has leftover pie dough, he puts it in the oven with some cinnamon and sugar and butter on it, and then eats it like chips. It's delicious. We actually sold it in the store a couple of times, and it went like wildfire. So you can do that with all of your leftover pastry dough. And then, so if you do have extra on the side, you can just cut it off. All right, so next we will finish our chocolate. So the chocolate is all melted, and next what you're gonna do is I'm going to need another pan, which is right back there, and if my arms were a little longer, I could grab it. Fantastic. And so now what we're gonna do is we are just going to take our cream, and this bowl, this pan is a little overkill. We could probably use a smaller one, but I just threw it in the sink. So we're just gonna take our cream, our 6 tablespoons of butter. All of this is what you get from home. And then we have the small container of the sugar and the salt. And in the recipe, it does say to add the salt when you mix it in with the chocolate. If you're at home and doing this on your own, you can do that. But just for packaging sake, we mix the salt in with the sugar. So this, since the pan is so big, it's not gonna take that long to heat. And all you're trying to do is melt the butter in with the sugar and the cream. And so again, if you're, anytime that you're using a stove or if you're using knives, make sure that your parents are around. We don't want any phone calls. All right, and we'll just get this melted. And then with this chocolate, unfortunately, like I said, you do have to put this in the fridge for about an hour. You want it to firm up because, as you'll see once we add the liquid and the butter to it, that it's going to be like a almost like soup. And in order to scoop it into our pastries, you need it to firm up. So you put it in the fridge for, it only takes about an hour, and so that you can spoon it into your Pop-Tarts. But again, this is something that lasts in the fridge for like 4 days. So you can totally make it ahead of time. And all this basically is a ganache, which is just butter and cream and chocolate. We did add sugar just to give it a little more sweetness. And so this recipe is derived from one of my favorite bakers. Her name's Joanne Chang, and she owns Flour Bakery in Boston. And when I lived there, I used to go there almost every morning, and I would get coffee and a Pop-Tart, or I mean, she just has really fantastic things. But then when I moved up here, I just I couldn't do it anymore, so I started making them on my own, and it's just as good, if not better. No offense, Joe. This one's a little heavy, so I'm not gonna throw it. And then we will just whisk together our chocolate and our butter mixture. And you do want to make sure that you whisk this while it's warm, so that it melts into the chocolate. And so a secret that I learned, if you want to get this to solidify quicker, and this goes for anything if you're making curds or like lemon curd or something like that, and you want it to like firm up quicker, I always take it and I pour it, you could even pour it into a sided cookie sheet, because, you know, obviously the thinner it is, the quicker it's going to take to cool. So you can do that with this. If you really, really want Pop-Tarts, you can just put this in, and it'll probably take, it'll still take about 20 minutes, but at least it'll be quicker. All right, and so as you can see, that's like really liquidy, and at this point, if I were home, I would just take a spoon and start eating it, but I will not do that. All right, and so with the magic of television, we have some chocolate ready to go. And as you can see, this is a little bit big. You only want to use about a tablespoon, but just for neatness sake, I'm going to use this. So as you can see, it's scoopable. So you just want to take about a tablespoon and you just put it right in the center. And again, if you were doing this with jam or chopped apples and cinnamon, you would do the same thing. You would just want to make sure that you put it right in the center. And if you were doing something with like a raspberry jam, I always add a little bit of cornstarch or flour to jams, just to, it helps it not like bleed out the sides. And we're just gonna fill these, and this is kind of like if you've ever made raviolis. I don't know how many of you ever made raviolis, but it's basically the same idea. You just, we're gonna lay the other crust on top of it, and pinch them together. And one thing that you definitely want to do is make sure that you put enough egg wash, which I'm going to show you how to make, and that you do pinch it together enough, because if everything leaks out there, they'll still be good, but they won't be as pretty. All right, so we're going to make our egg wash now, and all an egg wash is egg and a little bit of water, and you do want to add that little bit of water to it, especially if you're using your egg wash for something on the top of something like a pie, because if you use just straight egg, it'll brown to the point of getting burnt, and you don't want to do that. So I have a little bit of water, so I'm just going to take just a tiny bit, mix it in with the egg. See that? I'm making quite a little mess here for myself. All right, and now we're gonna get our pastry brush. And again, pastry brushes are something that are totally worth buying. You can get one like this for really cheap money. You can go to Home Goods, or even if you went to like Williams-Sonoma or something, it's only gonna be about $7. So. And then, so what we wanna do is you dip your brush in the egg wash, and everywhere that you have a seam, you wanna put the egg wash. And don't be stingy with this. You want to make sure that you have enough. Think of this as the glue that's going to hold your Pop-Tarts together. So you go down the middle, and then down in between each. And the chocolate smells so good. It's taking everything I have not to pick one of these up and eat it. I always check to make sure I did all the sides, because more times than I can count, I've forgotten to do one side, and you can always tell because it leaks out. Then we're going to take our other piece of pastry, and you're just going to put it right on top. And you can pull it a little to make it fit. And you want to make sure that you press it down really, 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 really good. And if you get any tears, that's fine. You can dip your hands in a little bit of water and just pinch it shut. Okay. And then you want to go down the middle too. And then we're going to take our pastry cutter, and we're just going to cut down the center. And then down each row. See, it's just like raviolis, but better. All right, and then just to make them look pretty, I always do the sides again too. And then before we put them on our cookie sheet, I give them another little pinch, just to make sure that they are closed. So this one has a little rip in it. You can always perform a little surgery, because you really want to keep that chocolate in there. There you go. All right, so at this point we are ready to put them in the oven. And you can also take these and you can just throw them on a cookie sheet for a minute and put them in your freezer. And then after about half an hour, they should be completely frozen. You can take them out and wrap them individually and then just pull them from the freezer as you want to eat them. All right. So I use a bench scraper to get them off, and you want to give them a little bit of room on your cookie sheet, but they're not going to spread or anything like a cookie, so you don't need a ton. So on a cookie sheet that you'd have at home, about 4 of them will fit comfortably. And then, like I said, you always want to cover your cookie sheet with parchment paper. Alrighty. Now we're going to put these in the oven for about 30 to 35 minutes. Check them though, because I do rotate them, and just so that one side doesn't get burnt. So we will put these in our oven. This frosting, all it basically is powdered sugar, water, and vanilla. It's just a glaze to give a little bit of extra sweetness, but you can also melt some chocolate and put it on top. When I make the apple cinnamon ones, I like to add a little bit of cinnamon and nutmeg to the frosting and put it on top. You can really get creative with it. We have our powdered sugar, and we have some water. And you're going to need vanilla too from your house. So we will pour powdered sugar in our bowl, and then some vanilla. I always go, when I'm doing just a vanilla glaze, I always go heavy on the vanilla. All right. So this is vanilla paste. You can also use vanilla extract, but I am a huge fan of vanilla paste. It's a lot cheaper than buying vanilla beans, which I do buy, but I don't use it for things like this. Vanilla paste is, it has a richer flavor than vanilla extract, and I like it a lot better. And it's definitely worth the money. And you have to use, if a recipe calls for a teaspoon of vanilla extract, you would probably use about a half a teaspoon of vanilla paste. And so now we have our 2 to 3 tablespoons of water. So we'll add that much first. And you don't want this super duper runny. And the good thing about this is if you do make it too runny, you can always just add more powdered sugar. If you add like cranberry jelly or something and make cranberry Pop-Tarts, something really nice would be to use orange juice instead of the water and do like an orange glaze on it. Like I said, you can be really creative with this. And this pie crust, it also can be used for pies. I use a different recipe for pie dough, but this one is fantastic for it. And you follow it exactly the same, except you make, that will only make a bottom layer of a pie. If you want a double layer, you would double the recipe. We're almost there. If you want a thin but not soupy consistency. a little bit thicker than like you'd have on like a glazed donut. All right. So now I have some Pop-Tarts that are already done in our oven. And when they're all ready, this is what they should look like. And so they're a little bit golden. You don't want them to get too brown. And so we should let them cool for a little bit. But through the magic of TV, they are ready to go. So what I like to do whenever I glaze something is get a cookie sheet, put a piece of parchment underneath, and then a rack so that all of the extra glaze goes onto the parchment and you don't have to wash the dish. So what we do is we'll take our pastries and put them right on the rack. And they smell so good. All right. And so we have our glaze ready to go. And so you just dump your pastry brush in and just paint it on. And as I told you in last week's episode, I'm a big fan of frosting, so I always put on way too much. Then I think we are going to have a very special guest this week come and taste one of our Pop-Tarts. And the great thing about vanilla paste too is you can see the vanilla bean seeds. And it just tastes so much better. Seriously, just go out and buy vanilla paste right now. My favorite part are the sprinkles. I have a bumper sticker on my car, one that says Joe Biden, of course, and then another one that says Pearl Jam, of course, and then another one that says sprinkles are for winners, and they are. Sprinkles are for winners. So we will just take our sprinkles and sprinkle them on. And these also came in your kit. And if you're doing like jam-filled Pop-Tarts, you can use rainbow sprinkles, or you don't have to use sprinkles at all, but sprinkles are for winners. So if you don't use sprinkles, then I guess you're a loser. All right, so now we have a special guest coming by to taste one of our Pop-Tarts. So without further ado, can I introduce to you our very own Michael Smolak? Hi, Michael.
Hi, what do we have here?
We have homemade Pop-Tarts, and I'm sure you remember when we would make these in the farm stand, and
I
they
do
would
remember.
sell out almost immediately.
God.
These ones are chocolate filled.
I think I bought most of them myself.
I know.
They're so good.
So I would love it if you could try one and tell the folks at home how wonderful they are. And if they aren't, you can lie.
Ooh, and they're still warm.
They are still warm.
Mm-hmm. Mmm. Flaky.
Like me.
Chocolatey.
Like you.
Mm-hmm. And look at these sprinkles.
Yep. Sprinkles are for winners, Michael.
Sprinkles. Mm.
The pastry's nice and flaky, and that's from not working it too much and from keeping your ingredients cold.
That's right. Exactly what we do with our pies on the farm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael Smolak used to make all of our pies here when he was just a small child.
Yeah, when I was
Not
about
that
10 years. I was 18 and I was legal to be in the kitchen.
Okay,
right
yeah,
at that,
yeah.
That's when I
Child
started.
labor
right?
laws do not allow you
exactly.
younger than
Mm-hmm.
that. So.
Mm-hmm. This
Well,
is right.
right.
I'm going to eat the rest of this back
I
with
think
some milk,
Yeah.
watching TV.
Yeah. Well, it has Michael Smolak's seal of approval, so that's really all that matters.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you again so much for joining us. So thank you so much for joining us again this week where we made our chocolate Pop-Tarts. And as always, you can buy our kits at www.smolakfarms.com or by coming into the farm stand at 315 South Bradford Street, North Andover, Mass. And last week we did have some people that were out of state. If you are interested in getting our kits shipped to you, you can email me, Tricia, at education@smolakfarms.com, and we would be happy to set something up with you. Thank you so much, and I hope that you join us again next week for Baking with Tricia.
If